Hello students, I am Sheetal Singh from Panchsheel Balak Inter College, Noida, and today we will continue our first chapter, A Triumph of Surgery by James Harrier. As yesterday we have read that Tricky, he was very fat and his eyes were red and rheumy, and Mrs. Pumphrey, the mistress of Tricky, had been giving him malt, cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks every night, and Dr. Harriet found that the only fault of Tricky was his greed for food, and the doctor advised Mrs. Pumphrey to cut down his food rightly and give him exercise daily. But within a few days, the doctor received a call from Mrs. Pumphrey that Tricky was not eating anything and was vomiting again and again. And then Dr. Harriet suggested Mrs. Pumphrey that Tricky must be hospitalized for about fortnight. The poor lady almost fainted, but at last Tricky was taken to the hospital. And at the surgery, the household dogs surged around Dr. Harriet, and Tricky looked silently at them lying motionless on the carpet. And for 2 days, Dr. Harriet kept an eye on Tricky. As you can see in the picture also, this is Mr. Harriet, James Harriet. Dr. Harriet kept an eye on Tricky and gave him no food but plenty of water. And next day, the doctor was pleased to see Tricky jostling his way to his food bowl. No medical treatment was given to Tricky. Tricky's progress was rapid and he started running about the dogs, joining in the friendly barkings as you can see in this picture. So, as yesterday we have read that on the third day he begins to whimper when he hears the dogs in the yard, and Tricky starts taking a walk around the balls of licking casually inside one or two of them. So now we'll continue our text. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. Forward means here, hung over, and anxiously means very curiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. I dodged the questions about whether the cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather. But I hear James Harriet. I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convulsing rapidly. So now here we are talking about rapid, progress of Tricky. Tricky's progress is rapid. He was no medical treatment of any kind. He runs about the dog, joining their friendly barkings. The word conversing means gaining health, means rapid progress. Progress of Tricky's health seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozens at a time, to build up Tricky's health. For a happy period, my partners and I had two eggs each for breakfast, but in a limited diet. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. It was it was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with two glasses of wine before and several during the meal. Now, Dr. Hadget tells Mrs. Pumphrey that Tricky is not in danger and recovering rapidly. And Mrs. Pumphrey starts bringing eggs, 2 dozens at a time, to build up his strength. Wine and brandy are given to improve Tricky's constitution. The doctor informs that Tricky has recovered and Mrs. Pumphrey can collect him. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. So here, Tricky is not in danger now and recovering rapidly, and the doctor informs that Ricky has recovered and Mrs. Pumphrey can collect him. They were the days of deep content. Content means gratification. Starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. So, as doctor informs that Tricky has recovered and Mrs. Pumphrey can collect him, and at this point she became very happy. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey. Almost lost in the interior, and her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better? Yes, he's fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him. Within 2 weeks, Tricky has been transformed into a flexible and hard muscled animal. He is stretching out in a great bounds. And now, as we know that Mrs. Pumphrey remained anxious about Tricky's health, the doctor told him that he was better and was convulsing and feeling rapid progress now. This made her think that he had gone through some surgery. She thinks that he had gone through some surgery, so she sent 2 dozens of fresh round eggs, wine, brandy for him daily so that he might recover soon. But the doctor did not give those things to him because he really did not need this type of diet. The doctor and his partners enjoyed those eggs, wine and brandy, and after a fortnight, Mrs. Pumphrey came to collect Tricky. She was tense and worried as she did not hope that he was all right. But I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a lithe and hard muscled animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in a great bounce, his chest almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur means here, driver, opened the door, the car door opened, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap. Tremendous leap means tremendous means very in a very excited manner. Leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled "oh" and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her and licking her face and barking. As when Tricky sees his mistress, he leaps and sails into her lap. As the car moves away, Mrs. Pumphrey leans out of the window and she was tense and worried, and she did not hope that she was all right. But when the doctor brought Tricky, he jumped at once into Mrs. Pumphrey's arms. She was very surprised to see all this. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, bowls, none of it which had been used as the car moved away. Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window, tears shone in her eyes, her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." As we see that when Tricky sees his mistress, he leaps and sails into her lap. As the car moves away, Mrs. Pumphrey leans out of the window. Her lips tremble and tears shine in her eyes. She says, "Oh, Mr. Harriet, how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." As we know that no medical treatment was given to Tricky, Tricky's progress was rapid and he started running about the dogs, joining in their friendly barking. Dr. Harriet informed Mrs. Pumphrey about the recovery, and within 2 weeks, Tricky had been transformed into a flexible and hard muscled animal. And when he saw his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey, he became very happy. Mrs. Pumphrey thanked Dr. Harriet. Her eyes were wet and lips trembled. And she called Tricky's recovery a triumph of surgery. So, the theme of this theme is about an ill dog named Tricky and his mistress, Mrs. Pumphrey. She was a very rich lady. Her overfeeding the dog had made it very fat and ill. She came to the narrator's clinic, and when his advice did not work and Tricky was in danger, she called on the narrator and he decided to take the dog to his clinic. The doctor, that on the third day, the dog started showing some sign of improvement, and Mrs. Pumphrey started sending eggs and wines to improve the health of the dog. But there was no need of these items, as we know that narrator himself ate them. And after a fortnight, Mrs. Pumphrey was called to take back the dog home. Mrs. Pumphrey was very happy. So this was the triumph of surgery. It's not the correct sentence for this chapter. It was the only basis of balanced diet and what is the importance of exercise. So you, all the students, you have to revise this chapter thoroughly. And now the time for assignment. Okay, now the time for assignment. Chapter 1, A Triumph of Surgery by James Harriet. And your first question is, do you think parents like Mrs. Pumphrey exist? If yes, is it a good thing to pamper children? Why or why not? And the next question is, write an article on importance of exercise and balanced diet in about 100 to 120 words on A4 size paper or sheet if available. And the next is, prepare topic my pet for speaking skill, and the time is given 5 minutes. You have to done this assignment in your assignment notebook. Thank you all.